stream, we have two teams, the Thundercats and the Hawkalopes, playing on the much vilified map of Socotra. Three men to a team. We have Grim, Zach Frennett, and Johnny Bongo on the Hawkalopes, and on the Thundercats, we're going to have Kevin, Groundskeeper Willie, and Russ Frennett. It's going to be a hectic match with more than a few underhanded tactics and extreme cock ups. So, without further ado, let's get over to the scenic Socotra map and take a little look at our starting positions. As you can see, it's a lovely forested island around the edges, and around the edges of the forest, we of course have the rocks which prevent you from docking anywhere. Anyone who's familiar with Socotra will, of course, know that essentially it is one of the single worst maps ever released on Age of Empires 2. I think nobody out there would disagree with me, with the possible exception of Team Captain Grim from the Hawkalopes, who considers it a fine map indeed. As you can see, both teams start extraordinarily close to one another, and resources are not exactly plentiful. There are some interesting elevation points, which will make for some splendid tactical gameplay, however. So, obviously, you can imagine that this is going to be a map which will lend itself toward extreme conflict extremely fast. So, without further ado, I'll unpause the game while we do our little introductions and see who's playing what civs. So here we go. We have in the purple team captain for the Thundercats, the one and only Kevin, who has drawn the Koreans, repeat, Koreans, archer civilization heavily reliant on wood, of which there is, of course, plenty in Socotra. So no doubt this will be the player to watch from the Thundercats. Scrobbling down slightly to the player in the blue, we have Ross Frennett, who on this occasion has drawn the melee, repeat the melee, and he's already tucking into some delicious goats here. If I then scroll all the way back up to the top of Team 1, the Thundercats position, we have Groundskeeper Willie, who will be rocking the Mongols. Repeat, the Mongols. Another archer-heavy civilization, although obviously we are well aware the Mongols are the cavalry archer variety with their dreaded Mangadai. Perhaps we'll see some Mangadai from Groundskeeper Willie today. Only time will tell. Moving over to the other side of the cramped confines of Socotra, we have on the Hawkalopes, on the center position for team captain, we have Grim, recently runner up in the Miss Campbell Invitational Tournament 2020. He is in the yellow and he has drawn the Celts. Repeat, the Celts. A nation close to my own heart. So close that it is like a dagger twisted in my back to see an Englishman like Mr. Grimm playing them. But I'm sure he will do their warrior race a credit. Scrobbling down to the grey, we have Zach Frennett, who has drawn the Goths. Repeat, the Goths. A civilization of infantry might, as we know. We can also see that Zach Frennett has already wasted no time and is walling in Ross Frennett's delicious lemon bushes. Repeat, lemons. Ross Frennett certainly won't like that if he ever notices. Only time will tell as to whether he will or not. He's currently busy hunting and eating some zebra. Repeat, zebra. Certainly a good idea to eat your zebra before taking your berries, although one might imagine building a mill at some point to make this collection would be a little bit more convenient. We'll have to come back and keep a close eye because Zach Frennett's clearly up to some shenanigans here, although in the north, I see potential more shenanigans. We do see that I believe there was an attempted elephant steal there from groundskeeper Willie, who has now moved his villagers back and has moved them back onto zebras. So Johnny Bongo managed to retain his delicious elephant meat, and that will serve him well because he's playing as the Vietnamese, a nation well known for their tasty elephants. He's already got his wood up and running. Let's take a look at how Grim is doing. Oh, dead center elephant meat tucking into. We always like to see it. Zach Frennett, meanwhile, has not yet taken his elephant. He's too busy getting up to mischief. He's now walling in Ross Frennett's gold. Repeat, walling in his gold. Certainly not something to be enjoyed if you're Mr. Ross Frennett, who is looking to get his own back by slaughtering an enormous amount of zebra. Zach Frennett has now finally taken his elephant and is tucking into that directly under the TC. Love to see it. Bit of a wasted goat there, though, although it's only 20 food. We'll see if that's going to make a difference in the long run. Unlikely it'll have much of an impact compared to the enormous amount of wasted zebra meat to the north, which he has yet to see. But again, he is too busy getting up to mischief. He's actually getting up to so much mischief that he's walling in his rear stone now. Repeat, rear stone. It's actually a miracle that Ross Frennett isn't taking some sort of action, given that he's certainly seen this palisade. Has that been built yet? No, he hasn't seen that foundation yet. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He has certainly seen these palisades, though, because he is trying to tear them down with excruciating ineffectiveness using villagers here. Now that he's lost his berries, he is finally building a mill over here, although it's a little bit late considering all the deer, or in this case zebra, are already dead. But he is under some duress, so we will forgive him these foibles. Meanwhile, if we look back to the north, where we haven't taken a little gander in a while, we'll see that Groundskeeper Willie is starting to wall up and is preparing a little bit of a forward barracks, although frankly, in Socotra, almost every building you build to the right of your town center on this team's case is pretty much a forward building because you start so near the enemy base. So he's got some delicious militia. We're still in the Dark Age. He's got some delicious militia up and running in there. Meanwhile, Johnny Bongo is squirreling away his gold mines in a safe location. The militia will chase that villager down. We'll see if they get anything done here. She's certainly making a beeline for the town center, which is garrisoned, and the militia wisely divert elsewhere. Although we can see that Johnny Bongo is making militia of his own. These militia are basically just looking for some kills, and it looks like they are a little wary of getting killed themselves. Of course, these villagers here, do they have loom? I don't believe Johnny Bongo has researched loom just yet. Grim and Kevagen have now clicked up to the feudal age. Only right, as both are, of course, the team captains, and as can be expected, will be the first in the pocket positions, if any position can be considered pocket on Socotra. To get to the feudal age, we can see they've also got the most farms up between them, although Grim's still under construction. Meanwhile, if we take a look back here, it seems that in the south, the shenanigans have far from ceased. Indeed, Zach Frennett has now begun to bring in his own militia. And is demonizing Ross Frennett's villagers who are desperately trying to wall off his approach, but unfortunately he's got a barracks behind the walls. Repeat, behind the walls, which will continue to reinforce this militia rush as it happens. Now, Rosfredit has cleverly moved most of his economy and villagers to the rear, although obviously they are being hotly pursued by more militia units as we speak. Yes, it's certainly a tough position to be in if you're Rosfredit. Now, the real question is, has he asked any of his teammates for assistance? Now we can see that there is a bit of a man-at-arms push from Grim occurring in Groundskeeper Willie's base. Certainly not a sight you would like to see whilst still trying to wall oneself in and having only been expecting a militia rush from one's Dark Age opponent. Johnny Bongo has now also, of course, reached the feudal age. Indeed, I would say all players except for the southern players have reached the feudal age. They are obviously too busy with their extreme conflict to have reached it just yet. Ross Frenet's base certainly looking like a catastrophe of walls straight down the center of his town center. Although he does seem to have been nominally successful in blocking out any further advances in this area here. Of course, more villagers are walking around his base to the north and continuing to cause mayhem. We can see that the pocket players and Johnny Bongo and Zach Frenet, most players now, except for the two players under the most duress who are being rushed, are now in the quadruple figures in terms of score. Unfortunately, the Thundercats themselves still languishing in the triple figures, being hard pressed in both the north and south. Repeat, hard pressed. Groundskeeper Willie researching bloodlines in order to give his scouts here a little bit more oomph, a little bit more staying power as they respond to the rush relatively successfully, I might add. It's a wise tech to pick up. If we scroll back down to the south, we can see that there is militia pouring out now in the rear of Rosfrenet's base from this rear barracks. Fortunately, he does not really appear to have much in the way of military himself, only having the one scout cavalry. We can see that Kevagen has started to produce archers now and has teched up to the castle age. He'll be arriving in that in about a minute and a half. At which point we'll no doubt be able to expect castle and possibly some war wagons, some early war wagons, which would certainly prove decisive given the current feudal state of affairs, and indeed in the south, the Dark Age state of affairs. Certainly a Castle Age force of any kind would be able to roll into Rosfrenet's base and swat aside the Dark or Feudal Age forces that Zach Frenet is pressing him with. The only question remains is, will there be anything of Rosfrenet's base left to save by the time Kevagen reaches the Castle Age and can get those units built? Meanwhile, Groundskeeper Willie to the north under serious pressure as well. We have a hefty unit of archers from Johnny Bongo, in addition to those now upgraded men-at-arms from Grimm, supported by some spearmen, which is an effective counter to the scouts that he was using in order to push off the previous raids. So Groundskeeper Willie certainly the more hard-pressed of these two allies, and it does seem like Kevagin's focus will be on rescuing or trying to salvage something to the north rather than the south, because currently, as we can see, Ross Frennett's base essentially is still in full operation, despite the unfortunate building locations and the fact that he has lost a couple of resources. Essentially, it's not immediately or overtly threatened now that that barracks has gone down. So one would have to assume that any reasonable observer would have to say that the correct tactical decision would be to reinforce the north, which is certainly falling into disarray. We can see Thumbring coming in now to bolster those archers. Which will shortly be upgraded immediately after that to crossbowmen. And there is that castle as well, which is being placed on the hilltop in a prominent position. No doubt to act as a fallback point for Groundskeeper Willie's forces as they fight a orderly retreat against these archers as they move south. Groundskeeper Willie has well positioned his tower here. We can see there is an attempt there by Grimm to deny the castle, but it fails. Grimm and Johnny Bongo now joining Kevagin in the Castle Age. So, upon repeated urging, I believe, and because of this latest invasion of men-at-arms, Kevagin has been persuaded to move his crossbowmen into Ross Frennett's base, where they will block the immediate breakthrough by these men-at-arms and villagers. So certainly an unmistakable and undeniable save there of Ross Frannett by Kevagin. I don't think anyone could dispute that. Still, the men-at-arms being pushed back out by the presence of the crossbowmen. All the while, unfortunately, the northern battle continuing to deteriorate as Johnny Bongo's archers continue to slowly tick away at Groundskeeper Willie's economy. Many of his villagers obviously slain now at this juncture. As we can see, Zach Frennett's forces have been completely routed, killed, and sent back packing. The forward villagers have gone back to stealing stone, and thus, in an attempt to reinforce his other ally, Kevagin then moves his forces to the north. Truly, it's impossible to be in all places at once, but this plucky team captain of the Thundercats is certainly doing his best. We'll take a brief overview of the economy. We've got a lot of gold in the bank. on the Thundercats team. Sorry, did I say Thundercats? I meant on the Hawkalopes team. A lot of gold in the bank there for Zach Frennett in particular, who has been mining gold since very early on, and certainly seems to be stockpiling it quite a great deal. He was late to get into the Castle Age, though, of course, where most of the gold-heavy units are to be found, so no doubt he'll find something good to spend that on now that he has arrived. Ross Frennett getting double bit axe there. Repeat, double bit axe. Certainly a timely economic upgrade that will sway his conduct for the remainder of the game. Meanwhile, in the north, matters have deteriorated with the arrival of some siege support from Grimm, flattening much of Groundskeeper Willie's ailing base as he desperately buys food from the market and retreats his villagers south into his allies' base. We do have some war wagons up and running now from Kevagen, who have just responded to yet another raid by Zach Frennett into Ross Frennett's base and eliminated the threat yet again. Of course, looking at the wider situation, we can see if we look over to the aggressive Hawkalopes bases, they are largely unimpeded by enemy forces. Their economies are flush from their essentially unmolested state. And generally speaking, in a game on Socotra where there are such close quarters, it's quite easy to run out of steam at just that wrong moment where the game will undoubtedly be lost. But will that moment appear for the Thundercats? And if so, when? Certainly you would have to say it has arrived in vengeful force for Groundskeeper Willie, whose base is no more at this juncture. As the enemy forces prepare to march against the relatively undefended pocket player Kevagen, who is currently engaging in a little raid of his own against the enemy pocket player Grimm with those war wagons. As Zach Frennett arrives in the Castle Age. Zach Frennett clearing his villagers out of harm's way as the war wagons approach. A little bit of lag there, apologies. Of course, the war wagons somewhat distracted as Kevagen is forced to try to respond in some way or other to this attack on his home base, as Groundskeeper Willie rebuilds a new town center. The raid certainly continuing, looking for some plum villagers up here in Grimm's territory. Meanwhile, I noticed that Kevagen's archers were destroyed. I believe, if I saw on my other screen here, I believe they inadvertently were lured out by these onagers to an untimely demise, whilst focus was no doubt elsewhere. All too easy to happen to archers if they're not set to the correct stance. Even if they're sitting under a castle, they can be tempted out so easily. And here, yet again, we see these war wagons parking, possibly not in a very good spot, although they're getting some kills. It is certainly too little, too late. As we move back to Kevagin's base, we can see that these onagers are unopposed at this point. Certainly those archers would be much desired now in the home base, but of course they have also been lost. And down goes the hometown center, and it appears that this will soon be the end as the pop begins to plummet as well for Kevagin. Johnny Bongo's archers arriving very late to the party. He's upgraded them to arbalesters, but will Grim leave them any targets? One has to wonder. As the mighty force swoops down and around. Meanwhile, enemies back at the front gate yet again for Ross Frenish, his forward town centre, long defended by his long-suffering and unwavering ally to the north. No longer able to support him, it finally falls. Only after his ally's town centre, which is just certainly an image of self-sacrifice not often seen in Age of Empires, or indeed in life, one would have to say. Certainly the spirit of generosity is alive and well in the leader of the Thundercats. Castle still standing, but unfortunately, due to the fall of the northern flank here, it no longer guards against any forces from wheeling around it, and indeed it is now falling under heavy shelling from Johnny Bongo's trebuchet as the northernmost player in the flush of the Imperial Age is desperate to do some sort of lasting damage to at least one player. Certainly his archers, I suppose, in the early game did some significant damage to Groundskeeper Willie, but I have to say the most decisive units of the game, as I would say, the man of the match as it were, I would have to call it for Grimm's onagers, who have torn apart the defenses of not one but two players in succession. And they are now slowly but surely rolling their way into Ross Frennet's base as well. We can see Kevagin's population now reduced to a sad and sorry one. As he no doubt approaches resigning territory. We see Russ Frennish desperately trying to reconstruct a town center behind what is now the enemy front lines. Certainly a valid move and one that I applaud. Survivalism is always to be commended, of course, even in the face of these genocidal forces that we see tearing through his home base now. Groundskeeper Willie still wheeling and dealing in the market right to the bitter end with his remaining 8 villagers. Certainly you like to see it. It's an evidence of grit and determination in the face of despair and desolation as far as the eye can see, which is certainly all Socotra ever brings for one team. I suppose the same could be said of most Age of Empires maps, but Socotra certainly does the damage faster. Johnny Bongo's archers finally joining the party along with his trebuchets. So even though he is playing as the Vietnamese, he is using a time-old tactic here. Massed archers and trebuchets, we've seen him do it 1,000 times. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Britons with longbowmen flooding our screens. We've seen it time and again. And he's now got chemistry to boot as well. We can see those trebuchet now upgraded with flaming payloads. As Ross Frennett's lone remaining town centre, the last bastion for the Thundercats, falls under attack by Huskarls of Zach Frennett. Only fitting, I suppose, that Zach Frennett should do the deed and finish off that town centre, leaving no players with any population of any kind. And I believe the only remaining two producing buildings are the two markets on screen here. I believe Kevagen has actually already resigned at this juncture. So once this market is destroyed, the game will end. And so with that, victory, a well-won victory to the Hawkalopes, I should say, whose early aggression and clever use of siege onagers by Grimm managed to break through and crush the enemy. So that's it. Another Socotra game. Another absolute shit show for one team, and certainly a merry and enjoyable ride for the other. Such is the way with Socotra, it is vilifying to those who cannot manage to hold on. I've never seen a close Socotra game yet. I'm sure they must exist, and we'll continue to take a look at the Socotra map and see if we can replicate a close encounter. But I think the Hawkalopes had an early lead, and they held on to it and drove it home hard. So fair play to them. Next time, we might take a look at a free-for-all, I think, if we're lucky. They are, of course, a little bit longer, but there is a certain charm to the crazy things that can happen in them. So, with that, we'll say goodnight and long live Age of Empires.